Hi, everybody. Hang on tight. If we start to lift off the ground, we'll cancel the rest of this and head on inside the pavilion. I guess there was lightning threats today, but we're here, and we're gonna have an amazing evening tonight. I don't know this piece at all. My name is RL for those of you we've not met, and I'm the education artistic director for the symphony. But I don't know this piece at all. But I was talking to Deanna Imel, our production manager, and librarian, and all-around great person, who said that she was delighted today to be overwhelmed by the beauty of a new piece. So with that bit of information, we'll turn it right over to Samir and to get us started so we have time to get into the pavilion and warm up a bit before the concert begins. Samir Patel, our associate conductor.
Thank you. Thank you, RL. Good evening, folks. Great to see all of you here with us. Thanks for being patient with the weather. So, as RL mentioned, we are going to experience the Elgar Violin Concerto tonight, which is a piece that I actually have never heard live in performance either. And it is a masterpiece. And frequently we think of Elgar and we think of some of his other more popular works, but the Violin Concerto rarely gets played. And as I've learned over the past 2 days, because that's how much time they've spent on it, it's not an easy piece to put together, and it requires a lot of time and attention and careful rehearsing. And luckily we have a fantastic violinist by the name of James Ennis. I'm sure some of you have heard him either live before here or have experienced his recordings, but he's an astonishing musician, so we're thrilled to have him here as we present this work for you tonight. So I thought I would refresh your memories a little bit about Edward Elgar, the great English composer. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of English composers, are there? At least the ones that we think of. I always like to think of it as Wimbledon. I'm a big tennis fan, and for many, 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 many years, the English, the British, had always hoped for a British champion. And year after year after year, their hopes were dashed repeatedly until Andy Murray won recently, breaking a streak of several decades. And well, that's always the case as well with the British composers. We think of the names Henry Purcell from the Renaissance period, and we think of perhaps other composers who had visited England and contributed their own music to that culture, like Handel and others. Mendelssohn had gone to England and made a name for himself. But England really hadn't produced many great composers until the late 1800s and into the 1900s, especially with the name Edward Elgar. And he was born in 1857 and he died in 1934. So he lived a very, very long life. And as he used to shyly remark, he came from a humble background. He was the fourth of 7 children. His father was a musician, a professional musician who taught music and performed music, and also spent time working in a music store, a music shop in England. And Elgar didn't have the educational pedigree that perhaps some of the other compositional colleagues that were around at the time had. And so Elgar's start at music wasn't that he was a child prodigy by any means, like Mendelssohn or Mozart or any of those other great composers. His family got him started with music, and like many modern stories, he started with the neighborhood music teacher, and he had a voracious appetite for learning and for reading, and his mother would actually encourage him by learning in this manner. And so he would go to the local library and he would check out as many books as he possibly could about music and about music theory and composition and harmony and on the organ and so many of the other instruments. And that really was how he learned. When you think of other composers, for instance, in the continent, a lot of them had started music lessons at a very early age and then gone to a conservatory. Well, that was Elgar's dream, and when he finished his traditional schooling, he had hoped to go to Leipzig, Germany, which was the home of sort of a long tradition of musical thought, certainly in the 1800s, and he wanted to study at the conservatory there, but his father couldn't afford to send him. So Elgar became a clerk. He worked in an office for a short amount of time, and eventually decided that wasn't for him and that he would much rather dedicate his time to playing in local pickup orchestras and teaching music and working in the same shop that his father did. And so really, he didn't find success until later in life. This is one of the things I love about Elgar, is that he sort of had this long life, as I mentioned, but he didn't find success until his 40s. And much of that happened in the late 1800s when he met his wife, Alice, who had encouraged him and supported him, and eventually they left their small English town for London, which was a great musical center, of course, and he had hoped to try to cut his teeth there and make a name for himself, and it didn't happen. And so he finally went back to the town where his wife was from, and he continued to teach and to perform and compose. And it wasn't until the 1890s when a good friend of his, August Jaeger, said to him this wonderful quote, said, "Your time of universal recognition will come." This is in the 1890s, and sure enough, just a couple years later, he wrote this piece. I'll play for you. A piece that you've probably heard before. This piece, I'm sorry. This piece. Sound familiar? This is the Nimrod variation, which was dedicated to his friend August Jaeger, the same one who said your time of universal recognition will come. This variation comes from a piece Elgar wrote in 1899 called Variations on an Original Theme, Enigma. And the piece has somewhat of a controversy because still to this day people have ideas about where that theme might come from. Elgar had a penchant perhaps for these little riddles with music, and still today people are wondering where this theme came from. The reason I bring this up is because the same idea returns in the piece we're going to play tonight. So the piece, the Enigma variations that you just heard a sample from, that catapulted Elgar into fame. And I mean, he was already in his 40s at this point. This was the turn of, right around 1902 to 1914, which was his greatest sense of popularity. He was knighted, he traveled to America 4 times, he gave lectures, he was offered teaching positions. In other words, he finally made it and made it big. So Elgar, then, since he had found some recognition, the name Fritz Kreisler might ring a bell, right? So Fritz Kreisler was a great Austrian violinist, and Kreisler had said of Elgar, he said, "If you want to know whom I consider to be the greatest living composer, I say without hesitation, Elgar. I say this to please no one. It is my own conviction. I place him on equal footing with my idols, Beethoven and Brahms. He is of the same aristocratic family. His invention, his orchestration, his harmony, his grandeur, it is wonderful, and it is all pure, unaffected music. I wish Elgar would write something for the violin." Well, sure enough, Elgar did write something for the violin, which we'll hear tonight. He wrote it from 1905 to 1910, and he turned to Kreisler and asked Kreisler for his help, as well as the concertmaster, what we call the leader in English orchestras, the leader of the London Symphony Orchestra, Billy Reed. He turned to him and he said, "Could you help me figure out how to write this piece and make it very violinistic?" Now, the thing is, Elgar played several instruments, but he was a fantastic violinist. In fact, he had hopes to become a professional concert violinist, but for one reason or another, those ambitions and dreams never panned out. So, as you will see tonight, some of his perhaps virtuosic tendencies and come out in the piece that we are going to hear and experience. So Elgar wrote this violin concerto at this time, and it's written in 3 movements. The whole piece is about 45 minutes long, which is a long piece. And, you know, you're talking about 5 years, that's not too long of a gestation period. I mean, the other night we experienced Brahms' First Symphony, which took Brahms 21 years. But in the 5 years that Elgar was toying around with this piece, he had definitely put a lot of different ideas to paper. In the first movement, for example, there's several themes that you can latch onto. In the second movement, again, there's a beautiful, sweepingly romantic theme. His nobilmente theme. It's what he writes in the music, nobilmente, nobly. And he even said that that was the theme that he wanted inscribed on his tombstone when he died. Unfortunately, it was never inscribed. In fact, if you look at his tombstone, as I did online, you see this long tribute to his wife, Alice, followed. Also, here is, the remains of Edward Elgar. That's it. But anyway, so the third movement is a long, expansive movement as well. And a lot of the times in this piece, you'll hear the themes that you experienced early in the music itself return once again. And there's, as I mentioned earlier about this riddle, about the idea of enigma. Well, at the top of music, it is inscribed in Spanish, "Aquí está encerrada el alma de ... 5 dots. Not your typical ellipsis of 3 dots, but 5 dots. In Spanish, it comes from a book, and in Spanish it translates to, herein is enshrined the soul of, again, ... So, at the time of its premiere, everybody said, what is this? Who is this ... Who is this supposed to be? And, well, of course, still to this day, nobody knows. But there are many possible answers. Among them is a woman who Elgar was friends with, named Alice. Not Alice's wife, but another Alice. And this Alice had a nickname of Windflower. And she was his muse with the piece. She encouraged him, told him to keep going with it, keep writing it, and he wrote a theme for her. So that's a possible person to whom the piece is dedicated to. So it's one of those things that we will never know. But what I do want to say in closing about this piece is that it's typical Elgar. It's sweepingly romantic. It's lush. It's, there are times when the emotion is constrained a little bit. Then all of a sudden it erupts in almost like this beautiful English manner. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the piece. You're in for a fantastic performance tonight. I'd be happy to take some questions. Exactly. So the question is. The question is about the enigma variations, and he said there are several characters. Yes. So the theme, like I said, we don't know where the theme comes from, but in the score to the enigma variations, Elgar dedicates each variation to a friend of his. So it's a piece written in friendship. There's a movement, for instance, for his wife Alice. The finale captures Elgar himself. There is a movement about a friend of his who has this bulldog, and you hear and at the end you hear this bulldog splash down a hill and into the water, which is an episode that Elgar had seen. So these were all friends of his that he had written that piece for. Anybody else? Good. Well, stay warm tonight and enjoy the performance.
Thank you so much, Samir. Reminder that tomorrow night is our family concert, which Samir will be conducting. Bravo, by the way, on the Beethoven. Just great fun. But family means for everybody, so don't shy away just because it's the family concert. I think you'll find it to be really fascinating. And our lawn chat tomorrow night, I get to actually hold the mic for the night. And I've asked the Harriman Quartet, which are 4 of our high school students who spent the last 3 years coaching with Time for 3, to join me. So they will actually play for us here in our own little space. And we'll talk a bit about the education programming that goes on with the Sun Valley Summer Symphony, and then also talk a bit about the performance as well. So I think our lawn chat will be interesting and available for all ages as well. So if you have young friends, invite them to come along. I think they'll be really interested to hear our 4 high school students play. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow night when it will be at least a couple of degrees warmer and not quite as windy. I'm just putting it out there. Have a great time tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow.